We love them. We're going to miss them every day. We're proud of her. We're proud of them. We're proud of the things they did in their short lives.
How do you say goodbye to so many taken at once in such a horrific way? The family of 39-year-old Mandy Karolkiewicz and her 6 children left planning funerals, trying to hold on to every positive memory they can.
The first call about smoke came in just before 9 in the morning. Firefighters drove out to the quiet wooded subdivision on the shore of Lake Michigan, searched for the source, and found nothing. They left. Almost 3 hours later, the calls came again, and this time there was no mistaking it. White smoke was pouring from the windows of a 2-story house on Riverside Trail. House is full of smoke seen from the outside, a neighbor told the dispatcher. When crews finally forced their way inside to fight what they thought was an electrical fire, they were not walking into a house fire at all. They were walking into the end of an entire family. 2 parents, 6 children, ages 5 to 15. The family's pets, 8 people and every living thing in that home, gone in a single morning in Grand Haven Township, Michigan, and it was not the fire that killed them. The fire was set to hide what already had. Because police would soon determine that the man of that house, a father, a husband, a nationally respected executive whose entire career was built around saving lives, had shot every single member of his own family before he ever struck the match. This is the story of how that happened, how a family that looked flawless from the outside became a crime scene, and the quiet warnings, in one victim's own words, that were there all along. Before we go any further, like this video, subscribe, and drop the location and the time you are watching from in the comments. It costs you nothing, and stories like this one deserve to reach the people who need to recognize the signs before it is too late. Now let us start where it started, with a house that gave nothing away. Grand Haven Township sits on the western edge of Michigan, where the Grand River meets Lake Michigan. It is the kind of place people move to on purpose. Quiet streets, tall trees, boats on the water in summer, and a slower rhythm than the city's inland. The Karolkiewicz family lived on Riverside Trail in a 2-story house tucked into a wooded lot. The sort of home that photographs beautifully and hides everything. To the people who saw them from the outside, the family looked like a portrait of everything working. There were 8 of them, a father, a mother, and 6 children, 4 boys and 2 girls, ranging from a 5-year-old to a teenager of 15. 2 of the children had been adopted, a pair of 11-year-old girls, and the family had recently traveled overseas together, the kind of trip most families only talk about taking. The father was, by every professional measure, a success. Kristopher Karolkiewicz was 47 years old and held a senior national position at the American Heart Association, an executive in the part of the organization devoted to teaching life-saving skills, the training that puts CPR and first aid into the hands of ordinary people. His job, in the simplest possible terms, was helping others save lives. The mother was 39. Amanda Karolkiewicz, known to everyone as Mandy, was an aspiring teacher and, by every account and every photograph, the emotional center of the family. She documented their life with visible joy. Just days before the end, she had returned from a trip to China with her 2 adopted daughters, a journey she described as the trip of a lifetime. Her final public post, dated the 17th of July, was pure warmth. "We are so ready to be home sweet home." 8 days later, everyone in that home was dead. That is the version of this family the world could see. A successful father in a respected career. A loving mother making memories. 6 children, a beautiful home by the lake. If you had driven past that house on Riverside Trail in the middle of July, you would have seen nothing wrong. Because there was nothing to see. And that is the first hard lesson of this case. The one that runs underneath every detail we are about to walk through. The most dangerous situations rarely look dangerous from the outside. They look ordinary. They look enviable. They look exactly like this. One quick thing before we go on, because this case is the reason it matters. Most dangerous people do not look dangerous. They look like devoted fathers, respected professionals, loving spouses, the people no one would ever think to fear. By the time anyone realizes what they are living beside, they are looking backward at warning signs that suddenly seem obvious. Awareness almost always comes too late. That is exactly why I wrote my book, how to spot dangerous people before they hurt you. Not to teach fear, but to teach recognition. Inside it, you will learn how dangerous people think, the warning signs they give long before they act, and the behaviors that could save your life or the life of someone you love. And right now it is absolutely free. The link is in the description. Read it before you ever need it, not after. Now, back to that morning and the fire that revealed everything. Go back to that Friday morning, the 24th of July, because the timeline of how this was discovered is one of the eeriest parts of the entire case. The first sign that something was wrong was not a gunshot. Nobody reported gunfire. The first sign was smoke. Sometime between roughly 8:30 and 9 in the morning, people in the neighborhood began to smell it. The Grand Haven Fire Department was called out to the area for the odor of smoke. Crews came, they searched, and here is the part that lingers: they could not find a fire. There was smoke in the air, but no visible blaze, no obvious source. So they cleared the scene and left. For nearly 3 hours that house sat there, and no one outside it knew what it held. Think about how much that gap tells you. When investigators later described the fire as being set in numerous places throughout the interior, the early smoke without a visible blaze starts to make a grim kind of sense. A fire set inside a closed-up house, in multiple spots, can smolder, producing smoke that seeps out and drifts through a neighborhood before any of it breaks through into open flame that a passing crew would spot from the street. In other words, the very thing that made the first responders unable to find a fire may have been the nature of how that fire was set. It was not a normal house fire behaving normally, and in those 3 hours, whatever chance existed to reach that family had already long passed, because by the time the first wisp of smoke ever reached a neighbor's nose, everyone inside was already gone. Then, closer to midday, the calls came in again, and this time they were unmistakable. The 911 audio that has since been released captures it plainly. A dispatcher relaying the emergency to fire crews, a residential fire on Riverside Trail, white smoke coming out of the window, and a caller, a woman, describing what she could see from outside. The house was full of smoke, visible from the street, with an electrical smell in the air. This time there was no mystery about whether there was a fire. On the released audio, the urgency is plain. Dispatchers moved quickly, relaying the address, confirming the smoke was visible from the exterior, noting the electrical smell that made a caller think the house's wiring had failed. It is, on its surface, an utterly routine structure fire dispatch, the kind that plays out in every town in the country. Nothing in those voices betrays what was actually waiting inside, because none of them could have known. To the responders rolling toward Riverside Trail, this was a house fire. The horror was still minutes away from being discovered. Crews responded within seconds and rushed to the property. But when firefighters made entry and began moving through the smoke-filled rooms, the emergency stopped being about a fire almost immediately. Because in different bedrooms throughout that house, they began finding bodies. Not one. Not two. 8, the 2 parents. All 6 children, and the family's pets, dead from the fire and the smoke. An entire household, every person and every animal in it, gone. And it did not take investigators long to understand that the fire was never the cause of any of it. The fire was the cover. The Ottawa County Sheriff's Office moved quickly, and by the following Monday they had reached a conclusion they stated publicly. This was a murder-suicide. Their determination was direct and specific. Kristopher Karolkiewicz, the 47-year-old father, had shot and killed his wife and all 6 of their children. He had then set fire to the home in what investigators described as numerous places throughout the interior, a deliberate act meant to consume the house. And then, he had killed himself. Every one of the 8 family members had died of a gunshot wound. The fire came after. Understand what that sequence tells you, because it matters. This was not a fire that turned tragic. This was not a moment of sudden, unthinkable rage that spiraled out of control in an instant. Setting multiple, separate fires throughout a house is not the act of someone who has lost control. It is the act of someone carrying out a plan. It requires time. It requires moving from room to room. It requires intention at every step. Whatever was happening inside Kristopher Karolkiewicz on that final morning, the evidence of the scene points to something methodical, not something impulsive. And that is the detail that transforms this from an unimaginable horror into something worse. An unimaginable horror that appears to have been decided in advance. There is one more thing the sequence tells you, and it is quietly devastating. If the killings came first and the fire second, then the fire was never about escape or panic. It was about erasure. Someone who sets a home alight after killing everyone in it is not trying to get away. The perpetrator here did not survive to run. The fire, in that light, reads as a final act of control over the story itself, an attempt to decide how the family would be found and what would be left of them. It did not work. The smoke drew the very people who would uncover everything, but the intention behind it, the effort to control even the aftermath, tells you something about the mind that carried this out. This was not chaos. Every part of it, down to the fire meant to hide it, points toward planning. So the question that sits at the center of this case is the one that sits at the center of every case like it. Why? What could move a man with a good job, a big family, and a beautiful home to destroy every single thing he had built, including himself? The honest answer is that no one can ever fully know what happens in the final, private moments of a person who chooses to do something like this, and this channel is not going to pretend to read a dead man's mind. But this case is unusual, because unlike so many family tragedies that leave behind only silence and speculation, this one left behind a record. And that record did not come from the man who did it. It came from one of the people he killed. In the days after the family was found, this case did what every case like it now does. It exploded online. And the internet immediately began filling the silence with theories, assumptions, and fabricated certainty. That is worth naming, because it is the environment every fact in this story has had to survive. And in that flood, one thing surfaced that turned out to be real. A Reddit account began circulating online, one that appeared to belong to Mandy Karolkiewicz. And this is exactly the kind of claim this channel treats with caution, because the internet misattributes accounts constantly. So here is the important part. A major newspaper, the Detroit News, did not simply repeat the rumor. Its reporters independently investigated the account and confirmed its authenticity, matching the details in the posts to the family's real, verifiable circumstances. The marriage dates, the ages, the number of children, the occupations, the city they lived in, everything lined up. The account belonged to Mandy. And across dozens of posts written roughly 2 years before she died, she left behind something heartbreaking and, in hindsight, deeply revealing, an honest, private record of what her marriage was actually like on the inside. She had posted in a support group, an online community for people trying to rebuild a relationship after infidelity. It was a place to be honest, anonymously, among people going through the same thing. She had no way of knowing that the words she wrote there to survive would one day become the closest thing anyone would have to an explanation. What she described was a marriage that looked nothing like the portrait the world could see. By her account, her husband had been unfaithful. She wrote about discovering that he had cheated on her with an intern, a younger woman, roughly the same age Mandy herself had been when she and Kristopher first met, because Mandy had also been an intern at the company where he worked when their relationship began. Years later, she wrote, he was involved with someone in that same role. She described the devastation of it plainly, the self-loathing, crying in front of the mirror, the long climb back toward something stable. And she wrote something else, the line that echoes loudest now. She described the red flags in her marriage that she had ignored. In her own words, he has always had major red flags that I ignored, due to my own trauma and anxious attachment. She wrote that he had been raised in a family dynamic that, in her description, encouraged dishonesty. She was, in these posts, doing exactly what a person does when they are trying to understand a person they love and fear at the same time, naming the warning signs, out loud, while talking herself into staying. Because staying was the thing she kept coming back to. She was open about why she did not leave. We have 6 kids, she wrote, so the idea of leaving is insanely terrifying. And in a line that is almost unbearable to read now, She described the bargain she made with herself to get through the days. I kept telling myself, I love my kids more than I hate my husband right now. She wrote that they were in a better place, years out from the worst of it, but that it was still a fight to stay healthy. She was working at it. She was, by every indication in her own words, trying to hold her family together. Now, this channel is going to be careful and fair here, because fairness is the whole point. These posts are Mandy's account of her marriage, written from her perspective, and Kristopher Karolkiewicz is not alive to give his. They are not a criminal record. They are not evidence presented in a court. They are one person's private writing about her own pain. But here is why they matter so much. They are not a stranger's theory about what might have been wrong in that house. They are a first-hand description, from inside the marriage, confirmed as authentic by professional journalists, of a pattern of behavior that she herself labeled with the exact phrase that experts use: red flags, warning signs, the things that were there for years, that she saw clearly enough to write down, and that she could not find a safe way to act on. One pause here, and it is an important one. Police are not releasing the names of the 6 children, out of respect for the family, and this channel is honoring that completely. But they were real. 4 boys and 2 girls. The youngest was 5 years old, the oldest was 15. 2 of them had been adopted and given a home. So if this story is reaching you, take 1 second and leave a single word in the comments for them. Remembered, not for the algorithm. For 6 children who deserve to grow up. Now, the piece of this that turns warning signs into something the rest of us can actually use. There is a reason a case like this draws the attention of the people whose entire profession is recognizing danger in relationships, and it is worth slowing down on what they actually see here, because it is the part that could protect someone watching. When family law attorneys, domestic violence advocates, and threat assessment experts look at a case like this one, they are not looking for a single dramatic moment. They are looking for a pattern. Because catastrophic family violence almost never comes out of nowhere. It tends to sit at the end of a long line of smaller signs, most of which look survivable on their own. That is exactly what makes them so easy to ignore. Consider what was present in this case, drawn only from the verified record. A history of infidelity and deception. A partner that Mandy herself described as raised to lie, with what she called major red flags. A dynamic where she felt trapped by the sheer logistics of leaving, 6 children, making the idea of escape, in her word, terrifying. And then, layered on top of all of that, a sudden instability at the very end. Because there was one more development in the final weeks, and it may be the most important external factor of all. Multiple outlets have reported that Kristopher Karolkiewicz had lost his job at the American Heart Association just weeks before the killings. Consider what that job was, and what losing it would have meant to a man whose whole identity appears to have been built on it. He was a national executive. He worked, of all places, in the division devoted to teaching people how to save lives. It was a role that carried status, income, and a certain moral shine. The kind of position you mention with pride at a dinner party. For a man whose sense of himself was fused to being the successful provider, the respected figure, losing that could feel less like a career setback and more like the collapse of the entire story he told about who he was. The organization has not publicly detailed the circumstances of his departure, and this channel is not going to speculate about them. Because speculation is exactly the trap this kind of case sets. What can be said is only the sequence, and the sequence is stark. A man loses the professional identity that defined him. Within weeks, according to investigators, he destroys his entire family and himself. The timing matters, because it fits a pattern that experts in this field warn about specifically. And it is a pattern with a name. The single most dangerous period in a volatile relationship is very often a moment of loss of control. A job loss. A looming divorce. A financial collapse. A public humiliation. For a certain kind of person, one whose sense of self is built entirely on the image of the successful man, the provider, the one in charge. The loss of that image can feel like annihilation. And a small number of those people respond to the feeling of losing everything by deciding that if they cannot keep their family, no one else will have it either. Experts sometimes call this family annihilation, and it is one of the most studied and most chillingly consistent patterns in all of violent crime. Researchers who have examined these cases across decades find the same profile recurring with disturbing regularity. The perpetrator is most often a father and husband. He is frequently not someone with a long criminal history, but rather a man who saw himself and was seen by others as respectable, responsible, the provider and protector of his family. His identity is fused to that role almost completely. And when something threatens to strip that role away, a divorce, a bankruptcy, a firing, an exposure, some of these men experience it not as a setback, but as the end of the self. Researchers have identified recurring types: the man who kills out of a warped sense that he is sparing his family from shame or hardship, and the man who kills out of revenge or control to punish a partner or to ensure that if he cannot have his family, no one can. In case after case, the violence is planned rather than impulsive, and it is very often accompanied by the perpetrator's own suicide. Because in his distorted logic, the family and his own life are a single thing that ends together. Almost every element of that documented profile is visible, at least in outline, in what is publicly known about this case. That does not excuse a second of it. It does the opposite. It tells you these horrors are not random bolts from the sky. They have a shape. And a shape can, sometimes, be seen coming. This channel cannot tell you that is what happened inside Kristopher Karolkiewicz's mind, because he left no note that has been made public, and he is not here to explain himself. But the elements that experts flag as the highest risk combination were, tragically, present and documented. A controlling and deceptive dynamic. A partner who felt she could not leave. And a sudden, destabilizing loss right at the end. So what do you actually do with that, if you are watching this and something in it feels familiar? This is where the warning signs stop being a story about someone else and start being something useful. The experts who work these cases will tell you the same handful of things, and they are worth stating plainly, because they are the practical core of this entire story. First, the presence of a firearm in a home that also has a history of coercive control or domestic abuse dramatically raises the risk that an argument becomes a death. The research on this is not subtle. Access to a gun transforms the lethality of domestic violence more than almost any other single factor. Second, the most dangerous moment in a controlling relationship is very often the moment of separation or of a major loss. The period around leaving or around a triggering collapse like a job loss is when risk spikes highest. That is the opposite of what intuition tells people, which is why so many are caught off guard. Third, the behaviors that precede these tragedies are usually mislabeled as personality rather than danger. Controlling money, monitoring a partner's movements or phone, isolating them from friends and family, chronic deception, rage that is carefully hidden from outsiders, a need to control the family's image. None of these is a crime on its own, and that is exactly why they get explained away for years. And fourth, the single most important internal signal is the one Mandy described most clearly: the feeling of being trapped. The sense that leaving is impossible, that there are too many children, too much shared life, too much to lose. That feeling is not a reason to stay quiet. In the language of the people who study this, it is one of the loudest alarms there is, and it is precisely the moment to reach out to someone trained to help. Because there is help, and it is confidential, and it exists precisely for the person who feels as cornered as Mandy Karolkiewicz sounded in her own quiet writing. If you are in the United States, and you are experiencing domestic violence, or you are frightened of someone you love, you can reach the National Domestic Violence Hotline at any hour, any day. The number is 1-800-799-7233. They will not tell you what to do. They will help you think through how to be safe. And if you or anyone you know is struggling with thoughts of suicide or of harming others, you can call or text 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, and reach a trained person immediately. Mandy wrote her fears into an anonymous forum because she needed somewhere to put them. If you are carrying something like that, there is a better place to put it. One with a trained human on the other end. Before turning back to the family, It is worth placing this horror in its wider context, because one of the most damaging myths about cases like this is that they are freak events, impossible to anticipate, bolts from a clear sky. They are not as rare as people want to believe. Family killings of this kind happen in the United States with a regularity that most people would find shocking if the cases were ever counted together instead of appearing one at a time, each treated as its own isolated nightmare. Researchers who study them estimate that these mass family killings occur, on average, more than once a month somewhere in the country. They cut across income, race, religion, and neighborhood. They happen in struggling households and, as here, in prosperous ones with beautiful homes and impressive titles. The common thread is almost never poverty or obvious dysfunction. It is a particular psychology of control, ownership, and collapse, hiding behind an ordinary front door. Understanding that these events have a pattern is not morbid. It is the only thing that makes them even partly preventable, because a pattern is something you can learn to recognize, and a bolt from the sky is not. Come back now to the people at the heart of this, because in a story dominated by the man who ended it, they deserve the last and largest share of the attention. Mandy Karolkiewicz was 39 years old. She was, by every account, the light of that family. She wanted to be a teacher. She loved her children with a ferocity that comes through in every post she wrote, even the darkest ones. Because the darkest ones were all ultimately about them, about staying for them, about loving them more than she hated her fear. Days before she died, she had taken her 2 adopted daughters across the world to China, wanting to give them something extraordinary. The photographs from that trip are almost unbearable to look at now. Mandy and the 2 girls in traditional Chinese dress, their hair styled, their faces made up, holding decorative fans against a painted floral backdrop, beaming, a stop at Shanghai Disney. The ordinary, radiant joy of a mother determined to give her adopted daughters a memory they would keep for the rest of their lives. She could not have known how short the rest of their lives would be. Her final public post, on the 17th of July, was a single bright sentence about the trip winding down. "We are so ready to be home sweet home." She was writing about the comfort of her own house, the one she would be dead inside of within days. Her last words to the world were about wanting to come home. She spent years, by her own account, trying to hold together a marriage that was hurting her, because she believed it was the right thing for her 6 children. Read her own words again with that in mind. "I love my kids more than I hate my husband right now." She stayed for them. Every hard day she chose to endure, she endured for them. There is a terrible, cruel irony sitting inside that, and it should not be smoothed over. The very devotion that kept her in that house, the love for her children that made her willing to absorb so much pain, placed her and those children in the path of the one danger she could not survive. That is not her failure. It is the trap that this specific kind of violence builds around its victims, using their own love and loyalty as the bars of the cage. She did everything a devoted mother is told to do. It should have been enough. It was not, because the danger was never hers to fix. She did not get to see her children grow up. Neither did they. The 6 children were 4 boys and 2 girls, ages 5, 11, 12, and 15, with the 2 11-year-old girls being the daughters the family had adopted, children who had been given a home and a family and every appearance of a good life. The community that knew them has described them the way you would expect. Kids who were loved, who were involved, who were part of the fabric of their schools and their neighborhood. Their names are being withheld, but their absence is enormous. 6 children is not a statistic. It is 6 entire futures, 6 people who would have become someone, ended in a single morning. And the response from the people who knew this family has been one of pure disbelief, which is its own kind of evidence. Neighbors, colleagues, and community members have said the same thing over and over. There was no sign. They seemed perfect. They seemed happy. That reaction is not naivety. It is the whole point. The people closest to this family, the ones who saw them regularly, saw exactly what the family wanted them to see, because that is how these situations almost always work. The performance of normal is often most polished in the homes where it is least true. Neighbors described a family that kept to itself but gave off nothing alarming. Children who played outside. A mother who seemed devoted. There were no reports of police being repeatedly called to that address, no public record of the kind of visible chaos people expect to precede a tragedy like this. And that absence is not reassuring. It is the most unsettling part. The danger in that house did not announce itself with sirens and shouting matches spilling onto the lawn. It lived quietly, behind a normal front door, documented only in the private writing of the woman trying to survive it. If you have ever caught yourself thinking that something this extreme would surely be obvious from the outside, this case is the answer. It almost never is. There is a particular cruelty in the detail that 2 of these children were adopted. Somewhere, at some point, a decision was made to bring 2 little girls into this family, to give them a home, security, a mother who would one day take them across the world to see Shanghai Disney. Whatever that home looked like from the inside, it was offered to them as a rescue. They were meant to be the lucky ones. That is the kind of detail that refuses to resolve into any tidy lesson, and it should not be forced to. It simply sits there as a measure of how much was destroyed. Grand Haven Township, a community unaccustomed to this kind of horror, has been left to absorb something almost impossible to absorb. Local officials described it as a tragedy that would affect the community for a very long time. Vigils and quiet grief have followed. And the investigation, while its central conclusion is settled, does continue in its details. Authorities have continued to examine the precise origin and sequence of the fire, working with arson investigators to document exactly how and where it was set. That work is not about questioning who was responsible. The sheriff's office has been clear on that. It is about completing the record of a scene that will never be prosecuted, because the only person who could have been charged is dead. There will be no trial here. No jury will ever weigh this. Which means the public account assembled now from the scene, the audio, and the authenticated writing Mandy left behind is effectively the final word this case will ever get. That is part of why getting it right and telling it carefully matters so much. But the central facts are not in dispute, and they are these. On the morning of the 24th of July, in a beautiful house by the lake, a man who spent his professional life helping others save lives took the lives of his wife, his 6 children, and himself, and tried to burn the evidence behind him. And in the wreckage he left, the only voice that could explain any of it belonged to one of his victims, who had been quietly writing down the warning signs for 2 years in a place she thought no one would ever read. That is the piece of this that should stay with you. And it is the reason a story this dark is worth telling carefully instead of sensationally. Mandy saw the red flags. She named them. She wrote them down. What she did not have was a clear, safe, supported path to act on them before it was too late, and a culture that too often tells women in her position to be patient, to keep the family together, to give it more time. The lesson of this case is not that Mandy did anything wrong. She did not. The lesson is for everyone standing where her friends and neighbors stood, seeing a perfect family and nothing underneath it. The signs are usually there. They are just quiet, and they are easy to explain away, and they are almost always visible only to the person living inside them, until a day like this one makes them visible to everyone, far too late. And to be clear about what that means, because it is easy to hear as a burden placed on victims, learning to see the signs is not the job of the person being hurt. Mandy saw them. The responsibility for recognizing danger belongs to all of us standing around a family like this one. The friend who notices a partner has grown controlling. The relative who sees someone slowly cut off from the people who love them. The co-worker who watches a respected man's identity collapse and does not think to ask if everyone at home is safe. These tragedies are called private for a reason, but they are rarely as invisible as they seem afterward. There are almost always people on the edges of them who felt that something was off and had no framework for what to do with that feeling. Giving people that framework, the ability to name what they are seeing and to know where to send someone for help, is the entire point of telling this story at all. Learn to see them earlier. That is the only thing that turns a tragedy like this into anything other than pure loss. If this story moved you, and if you believe these families deserve to be covered with care instead of just for shock, subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel covers these cases to honor the people in them and to help you recognize the danger signs the world keeps missing. That is the whole reason it exists. Amanda Karolkiewicz was 39 years old. She loved her 6 children more than she feared anything, and she said so in her own words. She wanted to be a teacher. She wanted to come home. Remember her that way, and remember the 6 children whose names we do not say, but whose lives mattered every bit as much as anyone's. If you take one thing from their story, let it be this. When something feels wrong behind a door that looks perfect, it is worth paying attention. Say their names in your heart, and stay safe. If you are struggling, or afraid, help is available right now. In the United States, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is 1-800-799-723, and the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is 988. Reach out before you ever think you need to.